What can you tell us about what the current policy is on whether Ukraine can launch long-range missile strikes into Russia using U.S. missiles?
I don't have any policy updates to speak to today. As you know, since even before Russia launched its full-scale invasion, the United States has marshaled a coalition of more than 50 countries to provide assistance to Ukraine and to hold Russia accountable for its actions. We have made clear that we will always adapt and adjust the capabilities that we provide to Ukraine when it's appropriate to do so. And you have seen us back that up with steps that we have taken over the past several years. But I don't have any new policy developments.
They have no new policy developments to speak to today. So you have the situation where Joe Biden loses the election, loses specifically on this issue, no less, meaning this was litigated in the election, and not content or not necessarily being able to accept the fact that he lost and that the incoming president took the position that he is going to end this war. Joe Biden decides to escalate with either doing so for posterity, meaning later on you look back and say, well, I did everything I could to keep it in our sphere of influence. Or even worse and more terrifying, to try to accelerate Ukraine's either entry into NATO, in fact, or de facto, one or the other. If indeed he's trying to accelerate Ukraine into NATO, that would mean that they have either believed Putin's bluffing, or B, accepted a war, meaning accept that they are going to enter into direct conflict with Russia. And I will go further and argue that the very attacks on Russia at this point are attacks from NATO, meaning these are not Ukraine as an individual actor. Russia does not see it as Ukraine as an individual actor. And it was pretty clear that if you guys are going to use these sorts of weapons in order to attack us, the fact that you have to use your hands to launch, your intelligence to launch, that it would be impossible for Ukraine to launch these weapons without either the US, the UK, or German hands on those weapons, then by definition, it is NATO that is firing those missiles into Russia, not just Ukraine by itself. They have been very clear that that is a red line. And nevertheless, Joe Biden loses the race. The American public effectively says, we have no confidence in you on the issue of foreign policy. We have no confidence in you in general. 70% of the public said we are dissatisfied, or for that matter, we don't like the direction of the country. And when foreign policy was added into that and litigated in that election, the Biden administration and psychopaths like Matt Miller lost. They lost in full. And they lost to a guy who said, I am going to end wars, not start wars. Joe Biden, despite the fact that the American public told him no, told him that he's going to leave, and not just even telling him he's going to leave. Joe Biden didn't even have the cognitive wherewithal, the cognitive fortitude to run in the next election. And yet, he has the ability, however, to end the world, which is where we're going. We are whistling past the graveyard. And whatever Joe Biden's plans are, they are utterly and fundamentally deranged and cynical in the sense that what he is doing is not going to change the context of the war. Meaning, what you're going to get out of it is minor in comparison to existence to which you are risking. I would argue that this is why Joe Biden lost. And maybe this is a good reason that Joe Biden lost. But now we're stuck with an incompetent president who, again, did not have the cognitive fortitude to even run in this election, as the entire American public saw that president. And yet the same president that we saw on debate night is the one that is making decisions right now about our existence going forward on this planet. Joe Biden will be dead and gone in less than 10 years. And he seems to be trying to take all of us with him. If he believes Putin is bluffing, that is a hell of a gamble, And people in this context, they bluff, and to the point where they are no longer bluffing. We are not, this is not on the border of Texas. We are literally on their border. Ukraine has literally invaded Russia. And, you know, for all of this talk about Russia attacked Ukraine, they're going to take over all of Europe. That stuff is nonsense. There were the Minsk agreements and more even after the war started, the Istanbul agreements. All of those agreements were effectively blown off by the West, not to mention overthrowing the democratically elected government of Ukraine is a hostile action. And all of this is happening on the Russian border. All right. You get this, which is utterly astonishing. Keir Starmer being asked directly, hey, he said that there may be nuclear war if you do this, meaning if the integrity of Russia is under threat, and if you're launching a large amount of missiles, they can accept that and react with tactical nukes in response. Are you okay with that? And are you okay with that for Ukraine? And even more on that, are you okay with that considering that what you're doing is not going to change the context of the war, but it could drag us into an escalatory spiral where we get hit? Are you okay with that, Keir Starmer? What do you think Keir Starmer is going to say? What do you think Keir Starmer is going to say? Right here.
To do
Just
that.
quickly, Russia's also threatened nuclear escalation. Are you comfortable with that when people at home are watching this, worrying that you could put us at risk?
Well, it's very
Nuclear war?
important. It's very important that we're steadfast in our support for Ukraine. Russia is the aggressor,
Even
and
if
Russia,
it unleashes nuclear war?
Russia has to be the one that makes the move to stop this war. It's within their gift, but we must support Ukraine. It's impacting not just Ukraine; it's impacting the rest of the world, including the UK.
Is your message to viewers back home that there will not be a nuclear war, because that is what Russia is threatening?
My message is that we need to ensure that Ukraine is put in the best possible position. This is 1,000 days of conflict, and there is a very high cost if Russian aggression is seen to pay off.
That's deranged. That is deranged. He is threatening or allowing Britain to be under threat for this geopolitical project of keeping Ukraine in the Western sphere of influence. And again, they overthrew the democratically elected government of Ukraine in 2014. And in overthrowing the democratically elected government in 2014, that is a hostile act. You didn't have to do that. You didn't have to move NATO to the border of Russia. Again, a hostile act. You didn't have to do that. I'm pointing out that at one step after the next, the West has taken aggressive action in order to surround Russia. And I'm saying, in this particular situation, they are getting desperate. And in getting desperate, they are getting reckless. That is utterly deranged. You're being asked directly, are you okay with potentially dragging the UK into nuclear war for Ukraine, especially when what you're doing is not going to change the context of the war? And his answer is effectively yes. That is utterly delusional. And understand the people who are taking these policies have no governing coalition. Yeah, Keir Starmer is in charge, but Keir Starmer, this is Keir Starmer rating. Keir Starmer has suffered the biggest post-election fail in approval ratings of any British prime minister in the modern era. Just months after coming to office, UK Labour leader is already languishing in the approval of -38. -38. That is his approval level. New polling of 1,000 adults, more in common found. It marks a 49-point drop from the +11 Starmer log just after Labour won its landslide victory in July. And to make this even more humiliating, Starmer is now rated less highly than outgoing Conservative leader and defeated Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. That guy that does not have a popular majority is the one that is making decisions that could potentially end the world, working in coordination with Joe Biden, who is a lame duck, out of his mind, old man, cognitively challenged, well-meaning, which I don't believe is well-meaning, with a poor memory, Joe Biden. Meaning these two goofballs, these two sociopaths are dragging us into a war, and they don't even have majority public support to do so. One lost a race, and the other one is deeply hated in his own country. And the same thing goes for Macron, that had to take this kind of miniature coup in order to put his man in power while ignoring who the public actually voted for. The German government has literally collapsed on the issue of funding Ukraine. These are the people that are dragging Europe and America to war. I'm trying to point out that Putin has like 80% approval rating, even by Western polls. These world leaders do not have public support, and they seem to not care at all. For all of the talk about, well, we're in democracies. We're in democracies. We have a moral high ground because we're in democracies. And yet, the democracies don't seem to matter in the context of actual policy on this notion of war and peace, especially when their particular project is at risk and the canard of $200 billion may potentially come to an end. They're panicking. They're getting reckless. And in their recklessness, they are either believing that Putin is bluffing or they themselves willing to go to war. And for all of these people say, oh, Putin is bluffing, Putin is bluffing. Look, people are bluffing until they are not. And then when they're not, you're stuck in a whirl of shit. Oh, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. Yeah, you got it wrong, but it was clear that you were getting it wrong from the get-go. Today, most Ukrainians want to enter the war. 52%. In 2022 and 2023, that number was at 27%. That number has jumped 30% in 1 year. The majority of Ukraine wants peace. These goofballs who are in another country other than Ukraine are escalating the war to the last dead Ukrainian. Because, look, let's be very clear, from the US point of view, we don't really care. These are Ukrainians. We're putting money into it. They're putting their bodies into it. And if we can stick it to the Russians, using the Ukrainians to do so, we will do so. We have even pushed Ukraine at this point to say, well, look, the attack Adams is not going to make any difference. Jake Sullivan, you need manpower. So you need to get your 20-year-olds, your 18-year-olds, you need to get those kids out onto the battlefield and put them in a meat grinder and go fight. We're giving you money. We're giving you weapons. We just need your bodies to go out and die. The UK, working in the context of NATO, has just fired Storm Shadow missiles into Russia. Right here. This, and this.
Взрывают сейчас. Вон там дым идет. Еще они там забомбили. Еще один прилет летит. Это взрывы, а?
Look, I'll tell you, that's not going to go unanswered. I don't know what it's going to look like. It may be, hey, Houthis, here's a weapon. But I strongly suspect there's going to be something more direct. Because I suspect that Russia at this point is stuck with a dilemma. How do you escalate to the point where you definitively get across that you are not effing around while simultaneously not going too far over the line in doing so? And what do you do to get that across? And that will be what I suspect what Russia does. Meaning, the point in the moment that you bring out a red line comment, your credibility is on the line and you're stuck with that comment. Meaning, you have a responsibility at that point in order to get across that you were serious. And if you don't get across that you were serious, they will continue to escalate. It's starting off with missiles. The next thing may be another weapon system. The next thing, at the very end of that, may be NATO troops going into Western Ukraine because they don't believe that you are sticking by your word in regards to this being a red line. Meaning, on some level, the Russian response needs to be done in order to prevent a larger war later on. Because what you don't want is escalation after escalation with this idea that Putin is bluffing, where you finally get to the point where the thing that you must do is something with tactical nukes because you're concerned about the integrity of the state. We are in a dangerous time. And if indeed what Joe Biden is trying to do is to accelerate this kind of NATO integration with Ukraine before Trump would get into office, or for that matter, instigate a war where Trump is going to have a much harder time unraveling NATO out of, then we are in a deeply dangerous time period. They may believe that Russia is not necessarily going to respond in some particular fashion because they think that they may be able to get a deal with Trump. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think from their point of view, there are 2 months. And within the context of those 2 months, NATO can try to get closer if they believe that Russia is not going to vigorously and forcefully respond. I have no idea what that response is going to be, but I strongly suspect that response is coming, especially since they have decided to unleash these attacks. I want to show one last thing. There are reports that an air campaign is expected for Kiev. And the reason they have these reports, apparently Ukraine has been able to find or see, intercept intelligence, however they were able to come up with it, that there was large contingents of airplanes that are being accumulated. And the thought being that those were going to run an air campaign over top of Kiev. On those reports of a, quote, significant air campaign, the embassies have been shut down in Kiev, Western embassies, the US, Greece, and there was one other, I believe, Italy. Right here, the United States Embassy in Kiev issued a warning, urgent warning Wednesday morning that Russia might launch a, quote, significant air attack, closing the embassy and telling employees to shelter in place. Air raid alerts are daily fact of life for Ukrainians in the capital. And it often comes under drone and missile attacks, but the U.S. Embassy rarely issues such a specific alert or temporarily shuts down. At least 2 other Western embassies, Greece and Italy, announced that they would too close for the day after the U.S. warning. Is it possible that they believe that the response is an overwhelming and massive air campaign that effectively flattened Kiev, or for that matter, as Scott Ritter pointed out, to kill Zelensky? I have no idea. But I would say that keep in mind, Joe Biden is responsible for this escalation. Joe Biden is doing this escalation after losing an election where he is literally a lame duck. It's worse than that because Joe Biden didn't even have the cognitive fortitude to even run in this race. And despite not having the cognitive fortitude to run in this race, the man that was on that debate stage that night to Donald Trump that said, "We beat Medicare," and that is half dead himself, is trying to take us with him. This is outrageous. And Congress really needs to get involved, considering he lost. It's one thing, look, this is not a situation where Joe Biden actually won or Kamala Harris won, where the U.S. litigated foreign policy and came down and said, this is the person we want. This is a foreign policy that we believe in which case Joe Biden is just enacting foreign policy where Kamala Harris would continue on with that particular policy. No, this is the opposite of that. This is the American public looking at Joe Biden, looking at Kamala Harris, and finding both of them wanting, and in finding both of them lacking in this capacity, that we want that guy. But Joe Biden, just like Obama before him, is trying to ignore the vote. This democratic country, and he is ignoring the democratic choice of the American public and is making an individual, solitary, unilateral decision that I don't care what the American public wants. This project, Ukraine, we would do everything in our power, including risking existence itself to keep Ukraine in NATO's sphere of influence. Let's be very clear. This is not entirely about Ukraine. This is about hubris. This is about humiliation. This is about spending hundreds of billions of dollars in order to lose. This is about NATO itself and the value of NATO if it can't necessarily enact something in physical matter reality. When they thought, well, we're the Western nations, we're a garden, we have all of this economic might. Look at the military that we've accumulated over the last 50 years, and all of it got smashed. All of it got smashed. And not just smashed, a new world coming into existence as a direct result of Europe going to shit. There's that. And NATO losing in Ukraine. It is a canary in the coal mine. The question becomes whether or not they're willing to accept the fact that they lost, that they have no conventional means of changing the context of this war, and that short of going to some kind of nuclear exchange, they have no capability of winning anything. There's no capability or there's no chance of winning a nuclear war. Everybody dies. Unless that's where they're going, then all of this is for naught. And maybe, from their point of view, we would rather take us all away as opposed to losing in Ukraine. And I think that is outrageous. Even risking it is outrageous. And we need patriots, people in Congress to stand up and say so. Joe Biden needs to be impeached. But the reality of it is, there's no evidence that Harris would be bright enough to recognize the will of the American public. As I said, we are in a world of shit. I don't know what Trump is going to do, but I would say that Joe Biden has taken a reckless, cynical, deranged course of action in the face of an American public that has said, we have no confidence in you on the issue of foreign policy. And Joe Biden has seemed to say he doesn't care one iota. He is escalating. We are waiting for Russia's response. We are waiting for Russia's response. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I'm going to say subscribe. Make sure you hit the notification bell. I pop in and out all times of the day and night. And also check out the show, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. We have guests, we do news, politics, commentary, the works. It is a damn good show. I call it the best damn morning show on the internet, covering news and politics. So definitely check me out. You guys have a fantastic day. Jamal Thomas signing off. Yeah, this is a dangerous time. Have a good one all.